Okay, good morning, people. Nice to see you this morning. It's Friday. I don't know about you, but I could use a weekend. Um, so Benamir's here. Good morning to you. Casey's here. Morning, Casey. Good morning, Mashid. Good evening to you, Ivan. Hello, Karen. Good morning, and good morning to you, Jimmy. We'll just wait for a few more people to trickle in, although not many people signed in on Microsoft Teams, so I don't know if people are taking a long weekend this weekend and just starting their weekend on Friday, but hopefully we'll see some more people shortly. Hmm. So what we'll do today is um, we'll quickly review the stuff we were talking about on Wednesday, the Jordan Peterson argument. Then we'll move on to some of the sexist messages that we might see in movies, and so I want to I, I want to sort of provide these to you and just sort of see what you think and see if you have experienced or identified some of these social messages in movies that you've watched. Okay, so we'll try to do that and see what we can come up with. Okay. Good morning, Duong, and good morning, Jenna, to you. Good morning. Um, yeah, so that's what we'll do. Let's do it. Um, so on Wednesday, it always takes a while for my mouth to start working here. On Wednesday, we were talking about this guy, Jordan Peterson, and an article that we read, which I believe was in the Globe and Mail, called "He Says Freedom, They Say Hate. The Pronoun Fight Is Back." Right, and of course, the article was surrounded the controversy about the use of pronouns on campus, right? And so the University of Toronto had released a policy and they had said to all of their instructors and staff, please use the pronouns that people ask you to use. And Jordan Peterson disagreed with that policy and said he wasn't going to follow it. And as a result, there was a lot of controversy and argument and discussion um, about that fact. Good morning, Baha. And so two of those arguments, I think, showed up in this article, and we tried to determine what they were. And I know we struggled a little bit with this, and that's okay. Um, One of the reasons that we struggled with it is that it was complicated. There was two arguments, and they were of varying complexity. The second reason that we struggled is that in the article, people weren't clearly laying out their argument, right? It was kind of scattered throughout um, scattered throughout the article, and so that makes it difficult too when you have to kind of find the pieces and sort of assemble them yourself and try to figure out what someone is saying. Um, Ideally, if someone's making a good argument, they will organize it for you so you can clearly see what they're trying to convince you of. This article wasn't really its purpose, so it made it a little more difficult for us. But that's okay. There is value in doing something and not being entirely successful at it. You do learn something from the process, and so as I say, we struggled a little bit, but I think that's okay. It was not an easy job. It wasn't an easy job for us. So we said that there were two arguments in this article that I think we could source. And the first one was Jordan Peterson's. And we said that Jordan Peterson basically felt that he shouldn't be forced to use gender neutral pronouns by the university. And he had these four premises, right? He gave these instances of support. And so in evaluating arguments, we said that we should try to make sure that the premises are true, or at least mostly true. Good morning, Chen. Um, we should try to make sure that the premises are true, or at least mostly true, or at least we can find out if they're true. And they should be logical support for the conclusion. And so here, all of these premises would be logical support for his conclusion, right? The fact that your academic freedom was being violated, the fact that your right to free speech is being violated, the empowering of power mad people, or, you know, creating the conditions for totalitarianism or an authoritarian or dictatorship government in Canada. You know, those would all be logical reasons why you would not want to use certain language, right? So his premises logically support his conclusion, but are they necessarily true? And I think we agreed that the bottom two premises are not true. This is not really a violation of his right to free speech or his academic freedom. And the top two premises are confusing and unclear, right? We said it was unclear how using certain types of language empowers power mad people. And it's not really clear who the power mad people are. It's not really clear how they are power mad. And so there's a lot to, in that second premise, there's a lot to unpack that isn't unpacked. And so I'm sure if we sat Jordan Peterson down, we might be able to get him to explain that statement. But as it exists, it's very unclear, and it's tough to know what's going on. And for the first premise, we said that, again, using this language leads to an authoritarian government. And again, it's not clear how using pronouns leads to that. That is quite a walk, right? That's a big jump from one place to another. And so the thing I wanted to drive home to you is that, and I think it came up a little bit yesterday, is that you may agree with Jordan Peterson, okay? You may agree with him, and that's okay. You're very much allowed to. But we need to be able to recognize a bad argument when we see it, okay? And so this is a bad argument, I think. Now, can you still agree with his position? Yes, you can. Should you come up with a better argument than he did? I think it's probably a good idea if you could, but just because someone is correct, or just because someone might be right, they can still make a bad argument, okay? So good arguments can be made for bad things, bad arguments can be made for good things, and vice versa, right? And so just because someone has created a logical, valid argument doesn't mean that what they're arguing is a good thing, okay? And vice versa. But again, you can still agree with him, and that's okay, but don't agree with him because of this argument, because, again, I don't think it's a very good one. The second argument was made by the university and by student advocates and by transgender people and gender non-binary people, and they argued that the university staff and students actually should be compelled to use gender-neutral pronouns, right? And so this group of people argued that people have the right not to be discriminated against, and that is true, right? That is a legal guarantee that you will not be discriminated against. They said that when we discriminate against people and we show our non-acceptance of them, it emboldens other people to discriminate as well and to start engaging in hate speech. And we saw that in the article, right? We saw people starting to issue death threats, and we saw white supremacists showing up at, academic talks, and, it created an atmosphere that was unsafe for certain people. We said that being compelled to use this language doesn't violate academic freedom, right? Because Jordan Peterson's not studying gender or gender pronouns, so this isn't part of his academic work. And again, being compelled to use this language doesn't violate your right to free speech, because it does respect the rights of others. And we said that as well, is that you are allowed to say what you want in society, in Canadian society. You're allowed to say what you want, but you are not allowed to infringe on the rights of others, and you're not allowed to speak in such a way that you are creating hate against certain groups, right? And so whether in fact that's what Jordan Peterson is doing here is a bit of a gray area, but his freedom of speech is not being violated, right? He is allowed to say what he wants, but the university is also allowed to demand certain behavior of him in a classroom. And I think we agreed to that too, right? That teachers have standards, we have codes of conduct that we have to abide by, right? And Jordan Peterson's no different. Jordan Peterson can't do whatever he wants in his classroom. There are limits, right? There are rules that he has to follow. Good morning, Erica, and good morning, Monica. Okay, so I'm going to let that one go. There are two sides to that argument. In this case, one side I think made a better argument than the other. Again, you can agree or disagree with it. It's a complex issue, to be sure. But I'll leave it there. I think it was a good exercise. Okay, so when we talked about sexism in advertising, so we looked at a few ads, we talked about some social messages that appear, and we said that advertising was important, right? Commercials were important. I'm not sure that anyone really watches them anymore, but once upon a time we did, because we had no choice. We just watched TV, and then the commercials came on and you just kind of had to watch them because they were there. But again, these numbers are most likely very wrong. Almost everyone has a mobile device. Almost everyone is using the internet all the time, as we are right now. And so we should be conscious of the social messages that we get in that media, because we're exposed to a lot of it. And we said that historically speaking, advertising tends to normalize certain things. It seems to make certain things seem normal. Okay, so again, certain roles for men and women and their jobs in the household. So often women looking after the kids and sort of doing the household work, often men doing the outside work and going to their job. Again, not always. These things are starting to evolve and change, but historically we saw very stereotypical things. We also tend to see very low diversity in advertisements as well. And again, that's been improving, but historically you saw a lot of white people in ads for things, and not so much people of color. We still see a lack of diversity in terms of ability. We still see a lack of diversity in terms of sexual identity. So we don't see a lot of gay or lesbian people in ads. And so advertisements tend to, again, normalize stereotypes about men and about women, about what their jobs should be and what their role in the household and in society should be. And it tends to normalize heterosexuality, because again, we don't see different sexualities represented in advertisements usually. But of course, social messaging occurs in other media as well. And so we started talking about this on Wednesday. We said that often there are typical plots and typical types of characters that we see in many, many movies, right? And so we met some of these characters on Wednesday. The absent-minded professor shows up very frequently, right? I think I referenced Rick and Morty. If you watch Rick and Morty, if you used to watch Futurama, there is a absent-minded professor in there. Of course, Doc Brown here from Back to the Future is an absent-minded professor. There's many, many of them, right? They're kind of old, they're a little bit crazy, but they're brilliant inventors, right? The angry black woman is another sort of stock character, right? There's often not much to her, but we see her in movies, particularly in comedy movies. She's kind of sassy and she tells people kind of what's what. And we're kind of used to seeing her, right? The bad boy, of course, is very popular in movies. Although I feel like recently there's been more kind of good boys in the romantic lead, but there's still lots of bad boys out there as well, right? The anti-hero, the guy who is the hero but doesn't always do heroic things. Sometimes he does some bad stuff. We said the crazy cat lady, the hot shot, the damsel in distress, right? The woman who is captured by the bad guy and really doesn't do anything except, scream to the hero, "Oh, save me!" Right? And that's kind of all she does. And then when the hero saves her, he or she becomes his reward, right? We've seen that a lot of times. The elderly martial arts master. We've seen that over and over again in Star Wars. We see Yoda. Kung Fu Panda. We see. I forget who we see. I forget what kind of animal he is in Kung Fu Panda, but there's an elderly martial arts master in there as well. And many others, right? There's lots of stock characters. And actually, now that we think of it, we can probably add the gay best friend to stock characters as well, because we saw that in Mean Girls, right? If you remember Damien, so there was Katie and Janice and Damien were kind of the three friends. And Damien is kind of a stock character. He's the gay best friend, right? And so we don't really know very much about him. They say he's too gay to function, right? They tell us that right off the bat. And he kind of, pretends, Katie's hair is on his hair. Does this look good on me? And so he very quickly falls into the stereotype of what a gay man is. He's obviously the best friend of Janice. And that's kind of all we know about him, right? We don't know what his last name is. We don't know what kind of things he's interested in. We never see his house or his family. He really has no story. He's a very flat character, right? So he's the gay best friend. That's it, right? And so in the first few seconds of meeting Damien in the movie, we already know who he is, right? So he's kind of a stock character as well. He falls into this category. Now, if we look at some of the messages that show up in some of the social messages that show up in movies, I want to start with horror movies. And I just wanted to ask, you, does anyone like horror movies? And why? Why do you like them? I don't. They're too scary for me. They're way too scary. But do you like them? And if so, why do you like them? Okay, so there's one vote for no. You can also answer why you don't like them. I assume it's because they're too scary, but so Mashid says no. Anyone out there that does? No. Casey says I do, but I'm scared. Well, that's kind of good. I think that's what's supposed to happen, right, Casey? I think you're supposed to be scared. Directors of horror movies would probably be quite sad if they learned you watched their movie and you weren't scared. Neutral with that, but not at night. Yeah, it's true. You don't want to watch the horror movie alone in your house at night in the dark, right? That makes it worse. That's okay, Pika. Let's see. So, seems like not a lot of horror fans. That's interesting. Karen doesn't want to be scared of walking around the house alone at night. Yeah, that's true. The ghost story ones are always the worst for me. Those ones really creep me out. I don't the creature ones and the serial killer ones don't bother me as much, but the ghost ones are really freaky to me for some reason. Jimmy says no. Oh, Casey says it's fun. It's fun to watch with friends, and the stories are very cool, especially if it's based on real. Oh, okay. So yeah. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit in comparative cultures, I think. If you remember, comparative culture people, if you remember when we talked about the power of story. When we talked about the power of story with Jonathan Gottschall, and he did that TED Talk, and he said that, people go to the movies and they actually feel the same emotions that the people are feeling on the screen, right? So if you do that with a bunch of friends and you're all kind of feeling scared, it's kind of a it's kind of a fun bonding experience kind of thing to watch a scary movie with friends, right? So it's much more fun, and again, if it's based on real life, it feels more, I guess it feels more real, right? It feels like it could happen because it kind of did. Jimmy says, not at midnight, but midday is okay. Yeah, but the problem is, Jimmy, eventually it becomes midnight and you still remember the movie. Um, okay, so maybe not a huge number of horror fans out here, but lots of people like these movies. They get made very, very often. You don't hear about them because they tend not to be big blockbuster movies, but they come out very, very frequently. And in some ways, they are very stereotypical as well. Okay, so just like we often see, the woman doing. Sorry, I'm going to sneeze here. Whew, okay, I'm back. Just as we often see stereotypes in commercials like mom doing the laundry or mom looking after the kids, we often see kind of the same stereotypical ideas showing up in horror films. And so uh, I don't have any super recent ones here, but the photo is from Texas Chainsaw Massacre that came out a number of years ago. There was a very popular I Know What You Did Last Summer series and Scream. Of course, there's been lots of horror movies since then. The Omen, The Ring. What else has there been? What am I thinking of? Just came out. I don't know. There's tons, right? There's tons and tons and tons of these. And many of these films, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and I Know What You Did Last Summer and so on, have kind of a very typical plot line, okay? So in many of these films, we see that we have a collection of characters, right? So very often, most of these people are women. Sometimes they're all women. And we pretty much know from the beginning that only one person is going to survive, right? So there'll be a collection of 5 or 6 friends. Maybe they're on a road trip. Maybe they're on, a cabin at a cabin by the lake for a long weekend. Some such thing, right? Maybe they go camping, who knows? But there's 5 or 6 characters together, and we pretty much know that only one person's going to survive, and usually that one person is a woman. What's interesting is that the woman who's going to make it through, we can usually very quickly identify who it is, okay? So if there's 5 or 6 characters, we kind of know who's going to survive the movie, right? Who's going to escape in the end. And we can also very quickly identify who's not going to make it. Often the women who do not make it are sexually promiscuous or unintelligent, right? So if we have characters who seem kind of dumb or seem, to have a lot of boyfriends or dress a little too revealingly, we kind of know that they're going to die, right? And so we see this again, we see this type of, we see this communicated to the audience through what they're wearing or the music they listen to or things that they say, right? So we know that sort of the unintelligent people, the people who are a little too sexually active, they're gonna be murdered, right? And I don't have a slide on this, but often peoples of color will be murdered earlier on as well, right? Historically, often the white woman will make it to the end, right? And what's interesting about these films is if you look at them from a particular perspective, you see that the outcomes for these female characters, so what happens to them in the movie, is usually connected to their relationships with men, okay? So usually the serial killer is always a male, or if it's a monster, it's usually a male monster, although The Omen and The Ring were a little different, but usually there's a masculine energy to whoever or whatever the killer is. So these women are going to be killed by a man, and the quote unquote bad girls are going to get killed first, right? So, what determines bad or what determines good? Well, societal views about women, right? Should women be super sexually active or should they be really flirty, right? And so bad girls often get killed first. And the good girl, the girl who is the smartest or the coolest or maybe has a boyfriend back home that she's trying to escape the serial killer to get to, she's often going to be killed. Well, she's not going to be killed at all. She's going to make it to the end of the movie, right? And again, when she does, when she survives this movie, her reward is often a man as well, right? She often is reunited with her boyfriend, right? So what happens to these women in a film like this is entirely dependent on men, right? So there's a male serial killer or a kind of a masculine monster, and these women are getting killed based on how kind of desirable or acceptable they are to sort of male prejudices, if you will. Depending on the movie too, you often see that the violence against these women is highly sexualized, right? So if you see lots of these movies, all of the girls are pretty. Many of them are kind of wearing revealing clothing all the time, and they're running around, and so there's kind of a lot of sexualization mixed in here, but then there's a lot of kind of gory violence as well. And so again, you have this weird combination of sex and violence kind of mixed together, which of course keeps people watching and keeps people interested. But again, does this normalize violence against women, right? Does this send a message that violence against women is just kind of something that happens, right? And not only that, do some of these girls, quote unquote, deserve what they get, right? Because if they have too many sexual partners or if they act a certain way, do they deserve to get killed? Because we do know they're going to get killed in the movie, right? We can almost figure it out from the very beginning of the film. Let's think about a different type of movie, okay? So what about any romantic comedy fans out there? Romantic comedies and romantic comedy and favorite one. Favorite funny romantic movie. What do you think? Trying to think of mine. Favorite romantic comedy, favorite kind of funny romantic film. I'm gonna go with this one. I'm not sure if this is my favorite, but it popped into my head. It is pretty funny, so I'm gonna say that one. Casey, oh yeah, Crazy Rich Asians. I haven't seen that yet, Casey. It's on my list to watch, and I think it's on Netflix, right? It's on my list, but I haven't made it there yet. The Importance of Being Earnest. Ooh, okay. I know that's a couple things. I'm guessing that's a movie there, Baja, but it's also a play as well, I think, if I remember. What else? Favorite romantic comedy. Favorite romantic comedy. It's very nice, yeah. um, and lots of great actors in that film too, right? There's Constance Wu in there, I think. Um, Jimmy O Yang is in there, who I like. Gemma Chan is in there. Who else am I thinking of? Everybody's in there. Okay, I will watch it. Maybe this weekend, Casey. Okay, so I'm sure we've all seen these, even if we don't have a favorite that we can think of off the top of our head. But again, these kind of romantic comedies have a very similar plot line to them. Okay, so tell me if this sounds in any way familiar. So the main character is usually a young woman, and sometimes she's a selfless caretaker, right? So maybe she's looking after a bunch of dogs, or maybe she's looking after an ailing parent, or maybe she looks after the old woman who lives next door, or something like that. So she might be a selfless caretaker. She might be a very career-oriented woman. The Wedding Planner. That's a good one too. That's Jennifer Lopez, right? Jennifer Lopez is in there. Yeah, and so in that film, actually, I mentioned it right here, right? The main character is a young woman who's a selfless caretaker. Good. Or she's an ultra career-oriented woman, so she might have her own business, or she might be kind of a high power executive, or she might have a very demanding career, right? And often she's kind of too involved in these things to realize how wonderful she is, right? And so she's kind of very involved with her life or her career or her hobbies, and she doesn't have a boyfriend, but she's almost kind of too busy to notice that there's no guy in her life, right? And so she's kind of just going through her life, not really knowing how special she is, right? And so people around her, her friends, people in society, they often talk about how great she is, and oh, she's so fantastic, but she doesn't seem to recognize it. She doesn't seem to know it. Okay. Let me know if any of this sounds familiar. Now, sometimes there actually is a guy in her life, right? There's a guy that she sort of knows, maybe she works with or lives nearby or something like that. But she doesn't like him. Okay, she doesn't think he's that great. But really, he's the guy, right? He's the guy, but she doesn't know it. We know it, the audience knows it. She doesn't know, right? He's really kind of a prince, but he looks rough, or he acts like a bit of a jerk. But she can tame him, right? She will be able to, her love will transform this guy from a frog into a prince, or from a beast into a prince again. So again, Beauty and the Beast is a good example of this. 50 Shades of Grey, which I'm hoping you haven't watched, but if you have, it fits into this category. King Kong fits into this category, right? So we often see in the course of this movie, we meet this, this sort of charming, beautiful woman who kind of has her life together, and she's, involved in her career. She's got friends all around her. She's got good relationships. She's got everything's, her life seems to be going really well. But of course, she's often encouraged by her friends, or her sister, or her gay best friend, to, that she needs to get out more, right? She needs to shake things up. She needs to, do something different, right? And again, the message that's kind of coming through here at this point is that even though her life is pretty good, right? She's got a great career. She's got her, a family around her. She's got lots of friendships and pets and hobbies and all kinds of things. That something's missing, right? That, there's just something that she can't be, or there's something she can't achieve unless she finds her guy, right? Her Prince Charming, unless she finds that guy, her life is always going to be missing something, right? And if only she could find that guy, things would be so much better, right? And so often we see that she meets this guy, often through sort of an accidental, they meet cute, if you will, right? They bump into each other in a funny way, or something happens. And often she doesn't realize that he is the guy, right? And so he has to convince her, right? So it's almost like she's, I'm saying coma here, but it's almost like she's asleep, right? It's almost like she doesn't realize what's going on in real life. She's so wrapped up in her own career and relationships that there's just, a whole level of experience that she doesn't have. But this guy has to sort of show it to her. This guy has to convince her, right? And once he finally sort of convinces her that he's the guy and that they should be together, we often see that somehow her life seems to improve, right? So after she, gets married or finds her boyfriend or whatever, her good life becomes even better, right? So her style changes sometimes a little bit. Her hair is done differently. She actually looks better, right? She looks better after she meets this guy than before. And in terms of breaking through the coma, I mean, we see this even non-metaphorically. I was talking about it in a metaphorical sense, but we often see it non-metaphorically. So here, Sleeping Beauty is literally in a coma, right? And the only way she can live, the only way she can sort of have a normal life, is to be kissed by Prince Charming here, right? To be woken up, to be almost given life by this other guy, right? Which is, I don't know, a little weird. Also, I don't think he got consent for that kiss. She's unconscious. Don't kiss unconscious people. That's not cool. So these kind of chick flicks as they're called, or romantic comedies, they are often targeted at women. They often reinforce the ideology that women are actually incomplete without a man. And so it doesn't matter how good her life is, the main character, it doesn't matter how good her life is, it doesn't matter how much she enjoys her career or her friends or dogs or whatever it is. It doesn't matter, because something's always going to be missing, right? There's always, she needs that guy to complete her life. And the movie and her friends, they try to convince her of that, and also they're trying to convince us of that. And so when she finally gets together with that guy at the end, then she can finally be whole. Then she can finally be complete. And we see that, again, because her circumstances tend to improve after, right? She seems happier. She seems to have more money, and her style is better, and everything seems to be great after she meets the guy. But again, her life was great before as well. But the movie tries to convince us that this woman's life can never be complete without a man, without the guy, right? I don't know the original Sleeping Beauty, Karen, and actually, now that you mention it, I'm not even sure I want to, but I think I'm just familiar with the Disney version. But I do know it's a fairy tale, and a lot of fairy tales start out pretty dark. When they become a Disney version, they're sort of sanitized for kids. But the original fairy tales are actually kind of dark and a little twisted sometimes. One of the things I wanted to sort of bring to your attention at this point was the Bechtel test. The Bechtel Test is something that appeared. It came out of a comic strip in the 1980s, and so it was. The comic strip was called Dykes to Watch Out For, and so I think it had lesbian characters in it at the time. This comic strip, and there was one comic strip that came out, and it was called The Rule. And so these two women, I think they're two lesbian women, they're going to see a movie, and one of the characters says that she only goes to a movie if it passes these three tests. Okay, so she says the woman has, or the movie has to have at least two women in it. The women have to actually talk to each other, and they have to talk to each other about something other than a man. Okay, they have to talk to each other about something other than the guy. So what do you think? How many movies do you think pass this test? Movies that have at least two women in it. And by women, I mean women who are characters, right? Who have names, not just, not just women walking in the background, like actual female characters. At least two female characters. These two characters talk to each other, and they talk to each other about something other than the guy or one of the male characters. How many movies pass that test, do you think? What percentage? Don't Google it. How many pass that test, do you think? What percentage of movies would you say have two women in it, two women characters, they talk to each other, and they talk to each other about something other than the guy? Actually, Mean Girls is a really good example of one that does pass it, right? And so that's yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Karen, because that's one of the really nice things about Mean Girls is that it does easily pass this test, right? There's lots of female characters. They all talk to each other. Sometimes they're talking about boys, which is fine, but sometimes they're not, right? Sometimes they're talking about other things in their life. So Karen's going to say 20% don't pass the test or do pass the test. How many movies? Again, don't Google it. That's cheating. Just want to know your thoughts. Ocean's 8's a good one too. Yeah, Ocean's 8 has 8 female characters that all talk to each other, and they definitely talk to each other about something other than the guy, right? Because is there even a guy? There's I don't think there's a romantic lead in that movie in terms of men, is there? Actually, that was a pretty good movie. Good cast, solid cast. So Karen says 20%, only 20% pass this Bechtel test. Okay. So those are both good suggestions, though. Ocean's 8 and Mean Girls are both excellent examples of movies that pass this test. They have lots of women characters. They talk to each other. They talk to each other about things other than things other than the guy. Erica thinks there are many. Okay. I won't spoil the ending for you then, Casey. Okay, Bad Moms, Girls Trip. Yep, that's another one. And so both of those movies are fairly recent. And so again, you can, as time goes on, I think this will get better because people are aware of the fact that in the past, movies have not passed this test. And so let me show you here. There's actually a website. You can go to the website, and they have a database of thousands of movies, and they classify them whether they pass the test. So somebody clearly has a lot of time on their hands, and they've created a database to see if films pass this test. And so as of April 2015, 58% of these films passed all three of the tests, of all three of the conditions. More than two women characters talk to each other and talk about something other than the man. 10% fail one, 22% fail two, and 10% failing all three. So there are 10% of movies that don't pass any of these tests, which is that's pretty amazing, right? Because women represent about 50% of the population, and yet half the movies out there, roughly 60% of the, or 40% of the movies out there, don't even have two female characters talking to each other about something other than a man, right? If you look at, here's a couple of other stats for you here. So Mark Harris in Entertainment Weekly said that if you had to pass this test in order to be an Academy Award nominee, in order to get nominated for an Oscar, half of the films wouldn't make it as of 2009. Of the top grossing films of 2013, again, half of them failed this test. Half of them don't have two women characters talking to each other about something other than a man. And Charles Stross here notes that about half the films that do pass the test only do so because women are talking about marriage or babies, right? So technically they're not talking about the man, but you know, they're talking about something that's very stereotypically connected with men, right? And so again, we're seeing that popular media is, sorry, that shouldn't say advertising, that should say movies. They are perpetuating certain types of roles and attitudes about women, right? They are saying that certain types of behavior is or isn't acceptable, right? So girls who are kind of dress more revealing or kind of are more sexually active, that's generally seen as bad, and so we see them get killed off really quickly in horror movies. We see that women who behave properly, right, so who are faithful to their boyfriend and aren't too sexual, they're the ones who escape. They're the one who escape the serial killer. And we see that kind of weird mixture of violence against women and sexualization, which is a little bit uncomfortable and problematic, right? In romantic comedies, we see that women are generally seen as incomplete, right? Something's wrong with their life without the guy, without the man. Even though at the beginning of these movies, many of these women have pretty fantastic lives, right? They have it together, but somehow in the movie we are convinced that actually no, she's wrong. She thinks she has a great life, but she's wrong because she's missing this dude, right? And so again, these ideas are kind of normalized that women are incomplete without men. And then the Bechtel test idea kind of shows us that films are very significantly populated by male characters, and the female characters that exist are there simply to talk about what the guys are doing and who they are, right? So there's a real imbalance between whose stories are being told. And I think that Bechtel test shows us that mostly it's men's stories that are being told, and women are very much the supporting characters, right? They're in a supporting role talking about the guys. Yeah. Okay. All right, I've got some more things to show you, but let's take a little break. I think it's about time. Come back in about 10 minutes, stretch your legs, get a drink, whatever, and we will talk about misogyny. Okay, so see you in 10. Okay, people, and we're back. So, what I've tried to show you a little bit is that, I guess a couple things. I've been trying to show you that there are social messages in film. Um, some of those messages might be problematic, right? They might say that they might make uncomfortable associations between women and violence. They might try to convince us that women are incomplete without a man. Um, they might convince us that women are not really important parts of any story, right? Because again, most movies have men as the main characters, the protagonists, and women are just kind of there on the sidelines helping out and talking about the men. And again, not all movies are like this, and we are seeing a lot of positive change. But historically speaking, um, many women, many movies didn't even pass that simple test to have a couple of women characters talking to each other about anything other than guys, right? And again, we said that in many cases, they're not talking about guys, but they're talking about marriage and babies, right? So that brings us to, a little discussion of misogyny, okay? So misogyny is a term for the dislike or contempt of or ingrained prejudice against women, okay? So this is a little different from sexism, because remember, sexism is a term for a relationship between social groups, okay? So here in Canada, and basically, unfortunately, in every country of the world, we have an inequality between men and women. Men have more power and opportunity than do women. And in some countries, there's less inequality. In some countries, there's more. But basically, every country in the world has this unequal relationship, okay? So that's what we're talking about when we talk about sexism. We're saying that one group, men, have more power in society than others. But misogyny is a little different, right? Misogyny is a kind of a specific form of prejudice, okay? It's a distrust or dislike or dismissal, there's lots of dis words, towards women, okay? And so sometimes we see this in a number of ways. Sometimes it has to do with discrimination and social exclusion. You may have heard of some companies or some industries being boys' clubs, right? Quote unquote. And so sometimes men will deliberately exclude women and they sort of keep it a boys' club. Sorry. Sometimes we see misogyny show up through outright hostility or androcentrism, so that's a male-centric approach to things, through patriarchy, so male-dominated systems, through male privilege, which men also have, by the way. Sometimes we see that women are belittled. Sometimes they are disenfranchised, so we don't listen to their voices, and we'll see that. Sometimes it's expressed through violence against women or sexual objectification. I'm not sure if you've heard that term objectification before. That's when you make someone an object. You make them into a thing. You use them for a purpose, and so it can be sexual, but you can also objectify people in other ways, right? So you kind of don't think about them as people. You think about them as a thing, a means to an end, okay? And there's lots of misogyny to be found in religious texts, but there's lots of misogyny to be found in other more familiar places perhaps as well. So let me ask you this. Does anyone watch this show? Has anyone watched it? Have you seen it? Do you like it? Have you seen it and do you not like it? What do you think? So here we have the cast of The Big Bang Theory, right? We have Howard and Bernadette and Leonard and Sheldon and Penny and Amy and Raj, right? Okay, so Baha's not seen it, okay. Other people? Casey hasn't seen it. Yeah, but only only Sheldon, okay. Thika hasn't seen it, okay. Okay, so if you haven't seen this show, I'm oh sorry, there's a few more. So Mashid hasn't seen it. Okay. So just so you know here, the Big Bang Theory, you can see there's a group of young people here, and basically they're almost all of them are scientists. Okay, so if you go from left to right, you'll see Howard. Howard is an engineer. Bernadette is I forget if she's a geneticist or some sort of biological scientist. Leonard is a physicist. Sheldon is a physicist. Penny is not. Penny is she starts out as a waitress and aspiring actress, and I think she kind of stays that way throughout the whole show, if I remember. Amy, Amy's a biologist of some type, I think. I kind of forget. And Raj is a physicist as well. So the three guys there, Leonard and Sheldon and Raj, are a physicist. Howard's an engineer. The two girls there, Bernadette on the far left and Amy on the far right, they're both biologists, I believe. And Penny is kind of a waitress actress person. So the show centers around this group of people, Leonard and Penny, who are on either side of Sheldon there. Leonard and Penny have a relationship that's kind of on and off through the series. On the far left, Howard and Bernadette have a relationship, and eventually they'll get married. And Sheldon in the blue and Amy in the yellow, they'll have a relationship as well. So this is a sitcom, right? It's a situation comedy. It's a funny show. It's about 20 minutes long. This show has run for, I think, 10 or 11 years. It's done now. It's over now. But it ran for about 10 or 11 years. Very, very popular show. Got lots of high ratings. The stars of the show here got paid tons and tons of money because it was so popular. So big show here in North America. Well, actually, that's good, Erica, because you're going to get a chance to watch a little bit in a second. So I'm going to put this information into Microsoft Teams here, okay? And this is what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to watch this video, and what it is it's a video essay. And so the video is going to show some clips from The Big Bang Theory, some little parts of the show, and the video is going to make a point about misogyny. So how these prejudicial ideas against women are actually transmitted in the course of this very popular show, which is interesting, right? Because it was a very popular show. It's a very funny show, if that's your sense of humor. I'll leave it to you to see if it's funny, but lots of people found it funny. It's a popular show, it's a funny show, but there are some problematic messages being transmitted in this show. And so what I'd like you to do is watch the video and see if you can do these things. Keep track of what kind of social messages are being transmitted about women and about men. Okay, so what are we learning about men and women in this video essay, and also what is being laughed at and why? Okay, so the author of this video essay will point out in a couple of places to pay attention to what we're actually laughing at, right? Because sometimes something funny will happen in a show and we'll laugh, but sometimes it's important to think about why we're laughing and what thing we're laughing at, okay? So I'm gonna let you do that. The video is about 20 minutes long, and so we'll come back here. I'll let you go and watch the video. Try to keep track of the social messages and sort of what is being laughed at, and then in about let's say 25 minutes, we'll come back here and we will discuss what we've seen. Okay, so go watch the video now. I hope you enjoy it. Keep track of the social messages and such, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. Okay, so good luck. Okay, good people. And we're back. I hope that was interesting to you. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you maybe saw some things there. Um, I'm okay with whatever you want to say at this point. I know I'm asking this question, but if there's something else that you want to throw out there, I'm happy to address that as well. So, social messages in the Big Bang Theory. What are we seeing being transmitted? So Mashid says here, nerds are often refused and ignored by girls. Right. So we see kind of a stereotypical character emerge, right? We see this guy who's usually a guy, usually very socially awkward, right? Really shy or nervous or not sure how to talk to girls. And as such, they don't get a lot of female attention, right? They don't get a lot of attention from girls. Jimmy says, so sexism is mostly harmless. That's probably an underlying social message that we see. But yeah, I think you're right, Jimmy. That's one of the ways that the author of the video essay kind of summarizes what he sees. Casey says, the men characters lack the common traits of a leading man in movies. Right. So that idea of the nerd that Mashid was just talking about, that stereotype, that sort of guy who's into computers and science fiction and is really kind of socially awkward and doesn't know how to dress stylishly and things like that. He's not confident, he's nervous all the time. That nerd is contrasted against the jock, right? The guy who's, the macho man. He's strong, he's tough, he's confident, he's good with the girls. He can be a bit of a jerk sometimes. So we kind of contrast those two stereotypes, the nerd versus the jock, right? And the nerd is often refused by girls, and the male characters lack that masculinity. And so there's two kind of sides to that. In a couple of places, we see men not taking no for an answer and ignoring the rules of consent, right? So no means no, right? And if a girl's not interested in you, she's not interested in you, and that's where you end it. But we see a number of instances where the Big Bang characters are pursuing women who aren't really interested in them, who kind of keep approaching and keep advancing. Leonard mentions that's how he and Penny got into a relationship, is he wore her down, right? He would not take no for an answer. What else? What else do we see? There's tons of stuff. Tons and tons of stuff. Casey says, yeah, women are being harassed in a lot of ways. That's true too, right? And so we see that in this video in a number of places, right? We see the webcam thing, the spying. That's where we see it mostly in Big Bang Theory. There's also kind of constant sort of sexual comments made about women that aren't really interested in hearing them, right? Nerds are mostly men. That is very true. Discrimination because of being a woman. Yeah. Yeah, we see that. What else do we see? So we have this nerd. We only have a few more minutes, so maybe we'll try and wrap this up. But so the video is trying to show us that there is this nerd stereotype that's been created, right? So they go back to that 1984 movie, Revenge of the Nerds, where we have kind of the creation of the stereotype, right? And part of how that stereotype works is that that nerdy guy is able to do things. He's able to be discriminatory, he's able to be sexist, he's able to be creepy, he's able to commit sexual assaults, and it's not seen as the same way as the sort of jock male character, right? Because the jock male character is cool and strong and confident. And so if the strong, confident character was to do that sort of behavior, it would be upsetting for people. It would make people angry. But somehow, and I'm not saying it should be this way, but somehow, when the nerdy character does it, it's cute, right? Or it's funny, or it's harmless, right? And so that social message gets transmitted because people see these guys as harmless, right? They see them as they're weak, they're not capable of, you know, being a tough, confident guy like the jocks are. And so, you know, it's not worthy of concern, right? But of course, for women it is, right? Because that kind of being sexually harassed, being discriminated against, being spied on, being subjected to all of these sexist comments, it doesn't so much matter who they come from. They are still damaging one way or the other, okay? And so, but getting these sort of nerdy characters to behave that way in a show makes it seem funny, right? It makes it seem harmless, and of course the audience is laughing along, and yeah, it makes this sort of sexist behavior seem harmless. It makes it seem not as bad as it normally would be, right? Yeah, that might have come up too a little bit with Howard, right, Karen? Okay, so we can come back to this video a little bit on Monday because we've kind of run out of time here. You've got lots of other answers here about some other stuff, but maybe we'll save that. We'll come back to it on Monday. I've got a second video to show you, which is similar but different, but we'll deal with that. We'll deal with that on Monday. So until then, I hope you have a good weekend. Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating in the live chat. We assigned our second micropaper yesterday, and so that is in Student Portal, and it's on Microsoft Teams under Files. And so, you know, if you had some spare time this weekend, you could always work on it. But I think I'll just leave it there, okay? So that's it for today. Have a great weekend. You're all lovely, and I'll see you Monday, okay? So bye.